I'm Greg Murphy, VP Innovation for LAC Wilson Allen, and with me today I have James Baldessara. So if you've seen our other webinars, then you should be familiar with me already, but I'd like to give you a chance to meet James.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining. So as Greg mentions, my name is James Baldessara and I am the VP of Data Science here at LAC Wilson Allen. My background is very similar to Greg's, been in legal tech, legal analytics for sort of 16 years, largely focusing on the more common flavor of analytics that the industry is probably used to. At Wilson Allen, I lead the team that looks to kind of deliver and scale modern approaches to kind of big data and I guess modern analytics as they're known.
Thank you, James, and thank you for that. Also covering my background for anyone that doesn't know me, I've got about 20 years in legal IT, mostly on analytics and data in general. Really working on the data science side for maybe the last 5 years pretty intensely. I've been using R and R Studio for 11 years now, but really as Microsoft has moved into the lake space, moving into data science in the lake space. That is something we're always looking to do from an innovative standpoint, and see how we can leverage these new technologies for our clients. Unlike some of the other sessions, we're going to start off today with a poll. So the first poll will be about business intelligence itself. So has your firm identified the need to analyze more than just financial data through traditional analytics / business intelligence? As James mentioned, we both have deep expertise in this space, working on the financial systems, financial analytics, what we classically call business intelligence. James and I will use the term classic and modern analytics quite frequently. Classic, when we say that, it's generally on-prem, it's SQL-based, it's generally financial statistics. If anyone's familiar with Wilson Allen and LAC, you'll realize that although Wilson started very heavy on the financial side, when we merged with Stanton Allen, we then moved heavy into the CRM space. So we ourselves have applied our analytical capabilities to many new data sources over this journey, as Wilson and Stanton Allen, and now LAC Wilson, and now, as we call it, NewCo, whatever's next, what will happen next year. James and I just see a lot more data sources where we are able to apply a lot of our old school thinking when it comes to analytics, is thinking of everything analytically with these new modern technologies. So for the results, I think this is, everyone can see this? 100% answered? Yes, 84%. So that's great to hear, because that's music to James and I's ears, because again, we've been working heavy on the financial side, but I don't want to say the real value, but the new net value we've been seeing over the last few years has been applying analytics to all these other disparate data sources. And we really find some really great insights in those.
I think,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think it's, I think the systems that capture the information beyond financial have got so much more robust and don't rely so heavily on people actually entering data anymore. There's so many scraping technologies and so many zero data entry systems that capture the context that really does, in my opinion, supplement financial analysis. And I think that's driving, what we're seeing, and it certainly correlates with the results of the poll for sure.
Yeah, and also today, if you have attended the past webinars, we've always wanted this to be a forum, a bit of a discussion. So in order to push this into more of a discussion, today is going to be a discussion. So it's going to be James and I going back and forth, unlike me just sort of presenting some stuff to you. So it's less nitty-gritty on data models and code, but hopefully a more informative discussion from hearing from the two of us. So covering the topics as we begin to get into them, the first topic that we'd like to talk about is the importance of the data lake when moving enterprise applications to the cloud. And to that, we're going to ask another question or another poll. And this one is going to be on data ownership. Let's pull that up. When deciding to adopt a cloud-based version of either new or legacy software, is data ownership availability considered as part of the vendor solution selection process? And this is obviously a loaded question from James and I perspective, where we do see a shift as firms begin to move to the cloud, and potentially the impacts that they are potentially not thinking of as they move their systems to the cloud, and what the vendors are providing potentially out of the box. So it looks like everybody's answered, I think. So yes, so good to hear, and not sure. Glad we put the not sure on there, James. Good call there. Which is also a great answer, right? That's part of the point of today, is to understand what are your peers doing, where are your peers on this journey, where, what we've seen from our clients, where they are on this journey. And, we really want everybody to kind of cross-pollinate and learn from each other as a part of this forum. So James, did you want to talk a little bit about some of that first point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting. So, we talk to a lot of clients who are at various stages in the sort of cloud migration. And, for a lot of it, it happens to a lot of the peripheral systems that sit around practice management systems, with a view that practice management will ultimately go to the cloud in the longer term. But it tends to be these systems that sit around the outside that happen first. And we get into conversations with clients about kind of data strategy and what it means once you go through this cloud migration. I guess the one thing we always land on is, if you don't take a step back and think about your estate, and when I refer to estate, I mean your data estate in its entirety post-migration. So once everything's up in the cloud, I guess in my opinion, and based on what I'm seeing so far, I think you end up creating basically almost a cloud version of what you've already got on premise, in that you have siloed data sources that really don't necessarily talk to each other in the way that they should. And you end up with somewhat, a lack of availability in some cases. And I think that's, for me, compounded by, sometimes only having access to quite limited APIs. So if you're not necessarily hosting the data, you can only get from the vendor what they provide to you. And I think that ownership and availability for me is a huge driver for why I like the lake, why we develop the lake, why we see value in the lake. And I think it's something that having centrally owned data, back in your tenant, gives you license to do what you need with it, I guess is my point. And I think it's something that needs to be considered beyond the migration. It's not just about shifting information from one place to another and taking advantage of cloud economics and efficiency and all the reasons for doing it. It's about, what do you do next? Like, what competitive edge does it give you?
That's some great points and some real world stuff there for me. We work with a lot of vendors. We're partners with everybody. We like to try to be partnered with everyone. We really try and work for our clients as much as we work with our partners. And I had one that loaded things into a cloud-based solution through API access, and that was all they had. And we just couldn't, the client couldn't audit the load. They didn't have the ability to see all of the information that was loaded through the API. There was no API to provide that. And we had to then spool through the low-level API, pull all the data back down to the lake, and effectively run the audit there. And so that's just an example in the real world where, although the cloud-based solutions are the way things are going to go, we're all going to be going to the cloud, is just the idea that for the firm to be able to own that data and really understand that they can look at all that data at the same time like they used to when it was on-prem and potentially all inside SQL Server. That is something that we do see as a gap as firms are moving to the cloud. Absolutely. So I think we're going to ask another question. So we have another poll for centralized ownership. Has your firm identified the need for centralized ownership in your tenant of cloud-based system data? Or is this something that potentially we're thinking about for the first time today? Interesting, some of these guys come back, I think 100%. Nice. All right. Watching it come up. So again, I'm glad we put it not sure. I'm not, I might want to give it another minute for people to come in, but you certainly hear it's something near and dear to James and I heart is this centralized ownership of the data. Do you think we can share the results, Monica? All right. So yes, no, and not sure. Only 25% are yes. So again, hopefully these discussions are something that are getting everybody to think about these things. Who owns your data? And to us, the data lake is potentially the answer to that question. Who owns your data? And the answer is you do, because it is in your tenant's lake. And that's something that we think is a strong argument for potentially implementing a lake if that isn't something you've done yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think anyone can argue about the value of data, right? Nearly everyone I speak to these days are now, it's identified as one of the key strategic initiatives most of the firms I speak to is how do we use data to gain a competitive edge? How do we use data to deliver better services for our clients, right? How do we use data to deliver insights to decision makers within our business, right? These are all, everything for me is currently revolving around the firm's data. So you invest in all of these solutions that do better jobs of scraping and collecting that data for you, but it exists in isolation and often exists owned by the vendor, right? For the most part, and it's provided to you through sometimes limited APIs. Now, there's not a silver bullet for that specific example, but I think if you want to make the most of the information you have, I think you have to look to a solution that brings the various data from various sources back within your ownership, right? And back within your tenant and back within how's the technology that you can layer on top of familiar technologies in order for you to do things with. And, as I came to this business and my mind was blown by the potential of what we can do based on my very traditional background in standard, the more financial analytics, it was like, lake technology for me was actually the perfect landing zone to solve that problem. And the more and more I speak to people about this, more it's becoming a more, I guess, broken environment where there's lots of data sources that now exist, but you don't own them. This actually ends up being quite a neat solution if it's architected properly.
That's great insight, James. And also, in that vein, continuing on that thread, what other problems does a data lake solve?
I think we've probably covered the ownership and availability piece quite broadly. I mean, I think governance is often something that is, people know they need it, but it's an art form in itself, and I think it is in many ways an industry itself. And there are tools out there that can provide the technical part of governance, but don't necessarily provide the process, culture, and change the business needs to actually apply governance. But it's absolutely something that, the technical part of governance can be solved for by the lake. It doesn't have to be MS, but MS have technologies that enable you to map your entire estate and certify data and own it and make things sensitive and really apply an admin layer to this huge estate. Because frankly, if you're going to start bringing lots of different data together, that only compounds the problem about, who can see what and how does this get populated and is this right or is this wrong? Can we trust it? You're only compounding all of the problems you always had. So governance is important. And I think integration is huge. If you think about, for me, if you think about the new universe of cloud-based vendors, right? Each cloud-based vendor is likely going to want maybe a certain part of another cloud-based system in their own world because they want to solve a problem that you have in that one system. I kind of argue that if you're going to go down that route, you're going to end up with duplicated data across multiple different instances, and they're only going to solve a very specific problem. Whereas if you bring everything inside your own world and you own it again, I think integration becomes a lot more streamlined and more efficient because there's one source that every system can leverage, right? And having everything in disparate cloud systems is not going to solve that problem for me. And I think finally the other thing for me is the analytics piece. We've done this for years, Greg, and everything's always been about think back to the old school way of doing things. It's like, how do we warehouse CRM data? You know, it's like, okay, well, we design a warehouse, we design a ETL process, that takes forever. We land it, you know, and then it's like, how do we blend it with the financial stuff? Okay, no one knows. So we need to figure that out. And the whole thing just takes too long. And I think like having things landed somewhere central, and we'll keep using the term central because it really is, having something landed central and then beginning to layer on top of that, I guess, transformational views that you can leverage for analytics is the big data or modern way of doing this. And, you know, without having somewhere that's pretty much infinitely scalable from a storage perspective, like you're not going to do that on premise. It's never going to come to life. Or you will spend, for me, months, days, years architecting the endpoint being a warehouse, and it'll be out of date the day you use it.
I completely agree. And for people that aren't as familiar with the Lake technology, in data warehouse speak, there's two big ways to go. There's the Kimball-esque data mart, where we have dimensions and facts. There's sort of the Inman enterprise data warehouse that has the atomic level detail, the original source records. The best practices we see in the Lake technology today is similar to that Inman model, where we keep a copy of all source data in its original format, and then have multiple layers of curation. And some of that curation can just be cleaning the data till it's operationally effective. Some of it can be highly transformed into a Kimball-esque star schema data mart. And then really that's what we're excited for, certainly on the data sciences team, is then having that data science AI enabled tier where we're actually processing that data and deriving new features in the data sets that are derived by machine learning. And that's some of the really exciting stuff that the modern Lake stack gives us. So certainly the ability to do all of those things are within Microsoft's Lake stack, but to James's point, we can still land stuff in its raw format. We can quickly add data to the Lake without having to design an epic warehouse. We can start small. We can iterate from a data design perspective with the Lake technology. That it's not like it was impossible in SQL Server. It's just from a data warehouse perspective, a Kimball-esque warehouse perspective, you'd really be designing the final state of the reporting before you would write one line of ETL, right? You'd really design you'd understand the specific reports you'd want to generate, and you design your warehouse to provide those reports. With the Lake, it's a little different, where we start small and we call it schema on read, where a data scientist will go in, look at data, do their own exploratory data analysis, do their own feature engineering, build their own machine learning models, build their own experiments. They'll do a lot of those things independent of sort of that's what we call schema on write data warehouse tier, where again, we can get into years of design and data engineering on some of these warehouses. And you see that too on the Lake. We call it the Lake House, where we eventually have this highly curated, highly transformed endpoint in SQL Server that all of our business analysts or data analysts that used warehouses prior can use. But in between, there's just so much capability for the data science skill set within the Lake. And we really just see it be a much quicker return on investment, a much more iterative and rapid development process with the Lake.
Yeah, I think I normally describe it to people as kind of like modern technology leveraging traditional principles. Like, you know, when you sketch this stuff out or you talk about it broadly, people are like, this is a complete departure from what I'm familiar with. And it's, you know, and in many ways it is, right? I mean, there's no getting around that. But when you think about the idea that, you know, you're landing raw data, you're transforming it, and you're storing it somewhere that's highly curated, I mean, it's not dissimilar to, you know, a warehouse sitting on top of a practice management system with an ETL process in between it. Right. The difference is we're doing this at scale. and we can make, I think the more important thing is, as you point out, is the development process is so much more iterative and so much more efficient. And we're not worrying about how much information we're storing. We're not worrying about trimming down data before we even do anything with it. We don't care. We just bring it all in and we'll work with what we've got. And, in the data science world, it's experimental, right? That's literally the point of it in many cases. And no data scientist is going to want to spend their life engineering data. They want to be playing with it and finding things for you. Because this is why this is why it goes beyond, I think, traditional or even modern analytics in many ways.
Yeah, and just you mentioned integrations earlier, just real quick for everybody. When it comes to integrations, 10 years ago, we would have master data databases as part of a big like Intap Integrate project we might do. And so any golden records like the matter number that was in the PMS system, and potentially that same matter number was in the document management system, we would keep that in a master data database. And same for user name between the timekeeper and the Active Directory. And putting that in that database is called a hub and spoke model, where instead of having all of our integrations go point to point, we put all that in one database. And that's kind of what James was talking about with the lake, is that the solutions or the vendor software solutions out there today have drastically changed, where we might have a CRM system that wants client, matter, timekeeper, fees worked, bills, collections potentially loaded in the CRM. You might have a pricing application that wants client, matter, timekeeper, fees, bills loaded into your pricing system. We might have an experience system that wants client, matter, timekeeper, fees, bills loaded into your experience system. So the amount of data that we would classically put in that hub database, which was just the golden records of data that was stored in two different systems, is now practically an entire copy potentially of your core practice management financials. And that is a big change. And we see the lake as helping enable those integrations. So moving down, moving on to our next question for API access. Would API access to a limited data set be considered a blocker to selecting new software? And you heard me mention a real world story earlier. And just be aware that's pretty much, I don't want to say that's pretty much all APIs, but as a concept it is that we you will not have the same level of data access through APIs as you did when everything was on-prem and you had a SQL database. You could get everything, and you had SQL geniuses on-prem, DBAs, data analysts that could go in there and write that SQL and get that data for you. All that has changed, where now it is all API access. You need, it is limited amounts of data. You have to understand the APIs to get the data out. And it is not going to be in SQL when you query it. So that is a big change. I think we can share the results. Looks good. So yes, so 50%. So good to hear. 50%. Still, not sure 33%. So that's good. I'm glad to hear that's 50%. But I think James and I would also caution you that it should probably be higher. That this can be critical.
I mean, I think it depends on your journey, right? Like you have cloud maturity, whatever you want to call it, right? Like these are the sorts of things you may not necessarily consider at this point. I guess it goes all the way back to my first question, or my first point, I should say, where yes, you would move to the cloud for all the reasons you would move to the cloud, right? But it's just one part, right? That's not the end of the journey for me as I think about data and data strategies for firms or any business. Access to it is just important because you won't, as Greg points out, you're not going to have what you had in many cases. So I always like to, I think this is it's a really good question to ask, and I think the results are interesting, as you say, Greg. But yeah, I mean, they will get. I think that will get higher. Is my, I think it will. Once people recognise that once we've done it, we need to do something with the data we have. Absolutely, it should be a blocker.
Yeah. So in that vein, James, what other pieces of information or capabilities do you think vendors should be providing at this point with the cloud journey?
So I think, I think we can keep, like, as a simple answer, I think, knowledge of the industry and its data. I mean, I keep it specific to law is incredibly important, right? Like there are lots of there's tons of vendors out there that do big data, right? But we are a unique vertical. We always have been a unique vertical. And I think every vendor that's going to help anyone go through this process needs to understand the information, the data they're working with, the systems they're working with. I mean, I think Azure can be a bit of a dark art, right? Like as you know, we know in innovation, and as we know as we work through our journey, everything can be not as it seems, and Microsoft are on such a rapid development timeline, everything changes. You know, products merge, et cetera, et cetera. I think being able to be on top of that and understand what's technically possible, you know, and not only make use of what's out there, but actually make it efficient and cost effective, I think are really important factors in this. You know, you can string together a pretty decent cloud-based big data solution. Is it going to cost you the earth? Probably. Is it, you know, that you need to work out, you need to know how to use the right technologies to keep the cost down, is my point. And I think I would always advocate the need to understand what's technically possible, but what also you should be doing. I think, you know, efficiency is important when provisioning, you know, cloud-based technology. You know, it's not just like the whole point of doing this is that it's supposed to be faster, right? So, you know, not every, you know, you can't stop time in some examples, but you should also be able to move a hell of a lot faster through this than you would do by going down the traditional on-premise approach. You know, so I think that's important. And I also think the ability to describe like governance and data management processes are becoming more critical. You know, like, okay, you used to maybe think of it as an afterthought, or think, well, you know, we'll get everything together and we'll figure it out, right? I think more often than not, and certainly with the people I'm speaking to at the moment, they actually want to do that bit first. You know, they almost want to take an assessment of their estate, the data sources that reside within it, and the data, you know, what data are we going to make sense of? And then it's like, who owns it? You know, how does it get populated? How do we certify it if we're going to make it available? How do we guarantee that someone's not going to misuse it? You know, these are all things that are now becoming so much more of a problem as you accelerate towards a connected environment.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And just on the spin my propeller hat for a second, one of the big things about those efficiencies is that with this cloud technology, they've separated storage and compute instead of a classic SQL server. So we can store petabytes of information in storage, and it doesn't cost us hardly anything. It only costs us money when we load it up and do some computations. You know, final thoughts. You know, for what should a firm know as you plan to embark on that cloud future, James?
I think like if we were to, I guess, summarize, like, I think understanding the benefits beyond just moving data from on-premise to cloud, right? Like, okay, yes, there are the obvious efficiencies and economic gains that you get from moving from on-premise to the cloud. But, you know, as I said at the beginning, I think you have to think about how you're going to use data, you know, to deliver better services for your customers and better insight to your decision makers. You know, I would say probably up to 90% of the managing partners or CIOs that we speak to, everything is about, you know, when you talk about these journeys and you say, why are we going to do this? It's like, well, we want to leverage the data to differentiate ourselves. We want to do something bigger than the person across the street, right? And I think you have to think about that. As I said before, I think governance and ownership is incredibly important. You know, I think every firm that's going down this route should think about it as part of the big picture. Now, some are good at it, some are not thinking about it as much, but if you're going to bring things together, ownership and governance are incredibly important. I think skill sets are a massive, I guess, kind of gap in this whole thing at the moment. You know, a lot of firms are very heavily laden with, you know, SQL. People that understand SQL, absolute SQL geniuses, traditional BI, nothing wrong with it. But I think if you're going to move down this route and you're going to start to think about combining data in a different way, lake technology, whatever, that's a different skill set. Azure is a different beast, and it's a big one. And I think it's something that you should think about. And I think the other thing for me is, I think culture is as important as technology for me at the moment. And, you know, I probably didn't give the audience, but the Sunday Times did a massive piece on culture in data and how the biggest organizations in the world are looking at culture and how it affects their ability to become data driven. And it's not a small thing. You know, you have to cultivate it, and people have to understand why technology is bringing them a better way to use data. And I think that message is just as strongly as important as the technology you adopt.